Are you looking for another group hug commander? Then you found the right video. Our commander is Gluntch the Bestower. For only 3 mana, we get a 0/5 jellyfish with flying, which is already a great start. At the beginning of your end step, we get to choose a player. They put 2 +1/+1 counters on a creature they control. Choose a second player to draw a card, then choose a third player to create 2 treasure tokens. What I love about Gluntch is that it specifies a player, so we get to be one of those, and we can leave one person out if we really want to, or we can always use each of these on our opponents, assuming there are 3 of them. So this deck gets to focus on any of these 3 great attributes, which is counters, treasures, or card draw. So let's talk about that. Starting with a quick and brief overview of the ramp, we have Marble and Moss Diamond. When these enter the battlefield, they're going to enter tapped, and we can tap for white or green. Arcane Signet and Felwar Stone. These each cost 2 mana and can tap for any color of mana, assuming our opponents have the other 3 colors. Arcane Signet can just tap for white or green, which is what we're going to need. When we actually need land ramp, we can do this with Borderland Explorer, Rampant Growth, Wayfarer's Bauble, and Collective Voyage. These are going to get us actual lands onto our battlefield, which is always great. And again, there's more ramp cards in this deck, but I always find that part of the deck tech pretty boring. So let's move on to removal. Again, I won't talk about every single card, but we have Reclamation Sage, Return to Nature, Contraband Livestock, and Citadel Siege. Reclamation Sage, when it enters the battlefield, we get to destroy an artifact or an enchantment. Return to Nature, love this because it's only 2 mana, and we get 3 options, which is artifact, enchantment, or we get to exile a card from a graveyard. Contraband Livestock, for 2 mana, we get to exile target creature, and then we're going to roll a d20. So if we get 1 through 9, its controller gets a 4/4, 10 through 19, they get a 2/2, and if we roll a 20, they get a 0/1. So the higher the number, the better the result that we're going to get, and less for our opponent. And Citadel Siege. Now this can also be a part of the +1/+1 counters, but specifically I want to talk about the dragons side of it. So at the beginning of combat on each opponent's turn, we get to tap down one of their creatures. And this can be very powerful, especially when we get to how we're going to win the game. So don't underestimate this card, because if they're playing Voltron, we can easily make their deck very vulnerable. And again, there's more removal cards, but we're going to move on to the next category. Now, if we decide to make ourselves the player that Gluntch chooses as making a treasure token, let's talk about Academy Manufactor. If you would create a clue, food, or treasure token, you get to create one of each of these. So we would get that treasure token from our commander, and we're getting a clue token that we can pay 2 mana and sacrifice to draw a card, which would be what Gluntch is doing for us already, but of course we don't have to pay that 2 mana. We also get a food token where we can pay 3, sack it, and we get to gain 3 life. I'm not a fan of food tokens, but it's an option. We're getting that additional token for free just for getting that treasure token from our commander. Now, if we're focusing on counters, let's talk about Orzhov Advocist. So at the beginning of our upkeep, each player can put 2 +1/+1 counters on a creature they control, and if that player does, creatures that player controls can attack you or planeswalkers you control until next turn. We get these 2 +1/+1 counters for free, and we're not going to be attacking ourselves, so that's great for us. Yoshian Dissident. Whenever an artifact enters the battlefield under your control, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. So whenever we're getting treasure tokens from our commander, this is going to feed into the +1/+1 counters. So you can see how we get to benefit from not just treasure tokens, but we get counters as well, even if we're choosing the treasure option. Herd Baloth. Whenever 1 or more +1/+1 counters are put on Herd Baloth, you create a 4/4 green beast creature token. This is really sweet. So we can choose the +1/+1 counter from our commander and get tokens for it for free. And then there's Nils Discipline Enforcer. Love this card because whenever we're putting counters on our opponent's creatures, they now have attacks to attack us for how many +1/+1 counters are on their creatures. And this can be very silly, and they're going to start to attack somewhere else, because why would they pay that much mana to hit us? Exactly. They're going to be looking somewhere else. There's a huge amount of ways to draw cards in this deck, but we're just going to mention them very briefly. There's Harmonize, so for 4 mana we get to draw 3. There's Secret Rendezvous, for 3 mana, you and an opponent get to draw 3 cards. There's Mentor of the Meek, so whenever a power 2 or less creature enters the battlefield under our control, we can pay 1 mana, and if we do, we get to draw a card. There's also Tenuous Truce, so we get to enchant an opponent for 2 mana, and at the beginning of the enchanted opponent's end step, we each get to draw a card. But whenever we attack the opponent or a planeswalker they control, or they attack us or a planeswalker we control, we will then have to sacrifice this, and of course the truce is over. But why wouldn't they go for it? We each get to draw a card at their end step. This could go on till we're the last 2 players at the end of the game. There's Coveted Jewel, for 6 mana. When it enters the battlefield, draw 3 cards. We can also tap it to add 3 mana of any one color, and it says whenever one or more creatures an opponent controls attack you and aren't blocked, that player draws 3 and gains control of Coveted Jewel, untap it. So this can go around the board several times. People are drawing lots of cards. It's a great way to start getting combat going as well. There's Heartwood Storyteller. Whenever a player plays a non-creature spell, each of those players' opponents may draw a card. There's going to be a lot of cards being drawn in this deck. And speaking of more group hug cards, there's Hunted Wimpus. When it comes into play, each player may put a creature from their hand onto the battlefield, only for 4 mana too. There's Rites of Flourishing. This is an absolute awesome card. So at the beginning of each player's draw step, they draw an additional card, and each player may play an additional land on their turn, and only for 3 mana. And there's Howling Mine, classic one for 2 mana. Whenever it's your turn to draw, you get to draw an additional card. And then there's Master of Ceremonies. This is very similar to our commander. So for 4 mana, we get a 3/4 Rhino Druid. At the beginning of your upkeep, each opponent chooses money, friends, or secrets. For each player who chose money, you and that player create a treasure token. For each player who chose friends, you and that player get a 1/1 white citizen creature token. And for each player who chose secrets, you and that player draw a card. In my experience, I'm typically getting treasure tokens and drawing cards. So that's money and secrets. This is an absolute awesome card for this deck because yes, it does promote that group hug. They're getting what they need, and most importantly, we're getting a piece of that as well. So now that you understand most of the deck, let's talk about how we're going to win. That is by creating tokens with Jarell, Monvuli Recluse. So whenever we're drawing cards, we're going to create a 2/2 green cat creature token, but this is when we're drawing at least our second card each turn. As well as with Gluntch, we can always choose the draw card option. There's Sylvan Offering. We can choose an opponent, and we and that opponent get to create XX green treefolk creature token, and we choose an opponent, which can be the same one if we wanted to, and we and that player get X 1/1 green elf warrior creature tokens. So we're making a huge amount of tokens, and then we'll have cards like Champion of Lambholt and Wild Beastmaster. So creatures with power less than Champion of Lambholt's power can't block creatures you control. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, we're going to put a +1/+1 counter on Champion of Lambholt. So this is going to let us swing at our opponents, and there's not going to be any resistance. And with Wild Beastmaster, whenever this attacks, each other creature you control gets +X/+X until end of turn, where X is Wild Beastmaster's power, which we can build up with Gluntch, by the way, and we can also build up Champion of Lambholt with that +1/+1 counter. We also have Combat Calligrapher. This is going to promote combat to our opponents by helping our opponents, and even ourselves, whenever we attack our opponents, they get a 2/1 Inkling. But what's great is that Inklings can't attack us or planeswalkers we control. And finally, let's talk about Solitary Confinement. At the beginning of our upkeep, we will sacrifice this unless we discard a card. We have to skip our draw step, we have Shroud, and we're going to prevent all damage that would be dealt to us. Why this is great is because we're always guaranteed a card if we have our commander. Or with all the group hug that's going on, we're guaranteed to draw more cards than we are with discarding one and skipping our draw step. That isn't going to hurt us one bit. So this deck had a budget of $50 and I got it to $45, so that extra $5 can go into more group hug awesome stuff. Or if you wanted to upgrade the lands, that's also an option. And if you like this video, you're going to love this one right here. Thank you to the members who help support this show. You can also become a member for 99 cents each month. I'll see you all in the next one. Peace.